Semiogogue, thank you so much for joining me. I can only apologize to what's happened to the word Semiogogue. You're the first person who I've had on whose name has been long enough, and the way that the word has wrapped is shocking and disappointing.
Yes, well, don't let it happen again, Mr. Avery.
Immediately after this recording, I will be delving into the back end of my software here to fix this glaring omission. But yes, you are about to face the Gauntlet, and I hope you are psychologically prepared. It is quite the ordeal.
I am ready. I am prepared. Come what may.
All right, round one. Do you want to talk about music? Do you want to talk about economics? Or do you want to talk about cosmology?
Oh, well, see, I'm not a musician, but I have all kinds of interesting ideas about music. Economics. The decision is killing me. Economics. I'm so weak. I've got these atrophied intellectual organs that just cannot handle economics. Cosmology. I don't have a coin to flip.
It sounds like you should go for music. These are not going to be. These aren't gotcha technical questions. This is discursive. So,
And there's nothing requiring like knowledge of
no
of scales or
theory or
tablature or how to.
no, 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 no.
Okay. Theory I can handle a little. Okay, yeah, let's try music.
Okay.
What the hell?
All right. Lyrics make little impact to a song. Some music genres are better than others, or classical Western music theory is irrelevant. Any of those take your fancy?
Uh, well, yeah, I could do the first or the third. Is this the only thing that I will be required to hold
No, this
forth
is just
upon
10
today?
minutes, and then we'll start again. New topics, new assertions.
All right,
There's
then
six
let's go
rounds in
with
total.
six. Excellent number. Then let us hexen. Let's do lyrics make little impact to a song.
All right. And are you going to be arguing in favor of this assertion, or are you arguing against it?
Very seriously, quite seriously, against it.
Great. Take it away.
Well, if one were to assert that lyrics were important, you could take a look at the ancient stories about someone like Orpheus, who is said to charm even the stones with his music. You could take a look, for example, at the way in which people who keep livestock can bring the cows home by playing a trumpet or a violin or an accordion. There's a way in which you will see the animals themselves entranced after a fashion by the sound of the music, and obviously they don't speak. There are videos that you can find on YouTube of a guy playing music for a fox that comes and sits and listens even as a wild animal because the music charms them after a fashion. Same with a guy, as I said, playing a trombone to bring the trumpets home. There are songs, in this case perhaps we're stepping outside the argument, where women will sing songs. There are cattle calling songs, for example, in Norway, and these involve lyrics, but one has to presume that the melody itself and the musical the music itself, the musical aspects beyond the lyrics or apart from the lyrics are core to it. However,
Cattle famously struggle with Norwegian, so
yes, well, depending on the cattle. I could not name a Norwegian breed, but perhaps some of them, are used to the sound of that language. There is, however, another way to look at this, which is that for human beings, there are levels to the communication inherent in music. And so, for example, for quite some time, I was interested in dance. And dance is a part of, historically and traditionally, is a part of many musical performances, whether it's, spontaneous dance on the part of the listener, or, for example, in the old days when you would have jazz music with the singer and the musicians, and, for example, tap or jazz dancers who would perform at the same time. You also get it, for example, with ballet, with opera in many cases. You also get it with flamenco, which was the form of music I was most interested in. And I spent quite a bit of time thinking about this. And you've got the musical layers, which communicate with an animal part of us. Of course, harmony, beyond just melody, is something that pervades the world. And we could see it, for example, with physics, right? So there are harmonics and the like apply to all sorts of things, from signals processing to light and color. There are many ways in which harmony underscores, in some sense, or provides some seeming order or limited order to what we experience in the world of physics as well as in music itself. So we've got the idea of the musical aspect, which you can divide with rhythm, which is, as we understand it, a very primitive aspect of music. Rhythmic signaling we can see across the animal species. So rhythm, and then melody, and then harmony as it grows more sophisticated. And then we bring in the singer. And the singer, of course, carries an emotional signal, which can come across even if there are no comprehensible words being used. So if you hear a flamenco artist, they'll often tune to the sound of the guitar. The guitar will hit a note. The singer will first, the singer will first provide a note, and then the guitar intended to accompany it will come in. So you'll hear a flamenco singer say something like, ay, 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 ay. And the guitarist will kind of strum with the note and know that everything that they're about to explore goes with that. But there's an emotional signal. They're saying, I, right? There's a expression of the emotional state. But then there is another level beyond that, which is the lyrical, where the words come into the song. And this is a point, it's a point at which linguistic content, properly speaking, rather than simply verbalizations or voiced states of emotion, are expressed, and that serves to anchor the other things that we experience in the song. So if you hear the sort of plaintive lost sounds of like a Pink Floyd song, it's one thing to hear the music. But people generally don't have, and unless they've trained it or they have it as a native talent, which is rare, relatively rare, people don't tend to remember melodies very well, or to be able to reconstitute them by singing them after they've heard them, unless, again, they have rare talent or experience training. So the words themselves tend to anchor in the memory these other things, and to communicate aspects of it that might be unconscious to the listener. So you can hear that plaintive sound in Comfortably Numb, but it's a very different thing to hear, there is no pain, you are receding, right? So it anchors it, it locks it in, it fixes it in our memory, and it makes it communicable. So lyrics are not necessary, strictly speaking, to musical communication. But when the entire traditional ensemble is presented, they're a key aspect of it. And just in closing, I would say that you have the rhythm, which is so fundamental that we've got it in our diurnal and nocturnal cycles. We've got it in the four seasons, all of God's order. But we also have it in the rhythm of movement, where you have marching songs that are based on the steps that are taken. You have it in the beat of our heart. And you carry on to the aspect of pitch, and that carries melody and harmony. And you'll see that people, as they communicate with each other, will tend to match pitch one woman goes, "Oh, it's so good to see you, Linda," and "Oh, good to see you too, Mary," and they'll begin to almost sing with each other unconsciously. But then there's the aspect of dance, which often involves gesture, so that the audience that's watching this entire picture appear has the rhythm, they have the melody, they have the harmony, they have the expressions, like an expression of supplication or of resistance or of violence, and then like this crowning polish, this last level that allows it to be integrated with all these other cultural aspects. You have the linguistic layer. And so I would argue strongly that the idea that lyrics make little impact, shame on you for using impact instead of just effect or affect. But I would argue strongly against this assertion, which I see as rather blind.
I'll take that dig. I agree with you. It's not a very well worded assertion. I did have to write these all in quite a hurry. So
well, it wasn't impactful, so
No.
It could be
worse. It strikes me that the use of language often gives a more concrete, more direct meaning to the expression. So if your music already anchors the listener emotionally, but there's some ambiguity, the music, in addition to the lyric, really makes it more precise, which is, I would argue, not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It's a choice. And if you have, Pink Floyd is interesting because you've got what was very common at the time, quite long guitar solos and instrumental passages in the middle of songs, where you have the lyrical content, which is poetic and has some ambiguity, but in those instrumental leaps between verses, you're really, it feels to me like you are journeying off into a realm that is somehow ethereal because of the lack of lyrics. And yet I'm also not arguing that instrumental music is better or worse. That actually giving a hint towards meaning, again, it's a choice from the artist. But I very much agree that it makes a big difference. I don't know if I'd argue it makes an impact. Now I'm second guessing the meaning of the word impact, but it will very strongly affect the way that you process the other things that you mentioned, the rhythm, the harmony. Do you feel the same way? That there's this kind of there's this dance happening between the ambiguous and the specific, and lyrics often are often a way of expressing this is and this is not what this experience is about.
Yes, although it must be admitted, and I'm sure you're well aware of this, so I don't announce it as though you don't know, the way in which the ambiguity of a particular choice in lyrics makes the song more accessible to people based on their ability to find some aspect of their own circumstances or memory in the same set of lyrics. So, depending on who listens to a given group of lyrics, aspects of it, based on their personal history and indeed their present circumstances, when they first heard the song or when they're again hearing it and hearing some other dimension, the ambiguity tends to carry over into the lyrics as well as a feature rather than a bug. You generally, musical lyrics are going to have a certain degree of ambiguity, or at least, let's say, multivalence, that you would typically associate with poetry, which is why you've got so much crossover between poetry and musical lyrics. Or, for example, a figure like Blake, whose poetry was very much informed by his interest in music and his singing. The poems are themselves called songs.
Well, now I wish that the format was that we just talked about this one topic for the full hour. But alas, time has slipped away from us, and I have to give you a score. And I'm going to give you by far the highest score for first round that any of my guests have achieved, which is a 12. So
the duodecimalist within me absolutely salutes the fact that you would choose 12, because 10 is a disgusting number. 12 is rich in factors and more appropriate. The number of the apostles, the months of the year. Yes.
It's a highly composite number, isn't it? Unlike 10.
Rich in factors, yes.
Yeah. Round 2, you have the choice of ethics, history, metaphysics. My next button says show score. That's a bit of behind the scenes of what I'm looking at. My controls.
Yes, well, let's go for metaphysics. I would embarrass myself attempting to essay history, given the fact that there are people like Apostolic Majesty in our circles.
Do you know Apostolic Majesty didn't choose history on this round?
Really?
Wow. Yeah, I think he just wanted to subvert expectations, perhaps.
Or perhaps take a break. My friends always said that, if you love books, never open a bookstore because you'll come to hate them. Yes.
Well, I've quite enjoyed with this format taking people outside of their normal comfort zone. So this is proving most enjoyable. Would you like to talk about our experience of consciousness disproves materialism, our consciousness ceases after we die, or cause and effect is real? And of course, you can take the negative of any of these statements if you prefer.
Well, this will be highly speculative, but of course, this is the metaphysics category, right? So speculation in this case is permissible?
Yes.
Then we'll do our consciousness ceases after we die. I would like to argue against this.
All right. Go ahead.
Okay. So there is an idea that consciousness ceases after we die. I hold the contrary view, though of course I cannot prove it. I believe that the greatest gift of the divine is the body in which we manifest. And this will be a bit heretical for many Christians, I would imagine, but I believe that there's nothing else to make anything out of other than God. The entire idea that there is some domain over which the divine does not exercise power, the pure power of a creator, not some crass understanding of power, such as we might imagine in human affairs.
We're not talking about politics.
Yes, the idea that there is something other than God that exists beyond God, or that is not within the domain of God's creation, other than a no thing, which is not quite the same as a nothing. I would think of it as unlimited potentiality, right? Or perhaps a place that had been created by God, but that has not come through grace to be aware of its participation in God. So you have the idea that the one sin that cannot be forgiven is a rejection of the Holy Spirit or Holy Ghost, right? Which is to say that the only thing that is outside God's grace is something that doesn't recognize it's within it, that refuses to recognize it's within it. And thus, excuse me, for me, that which exists, that which we are our flesh into which we manifest and through which we experience things, is itself a gift of God. And it has very many interesting implications when you begin to imagine a murderer and his victim, and the idea that God is a co-witness on both sides of that experience. And it is God's own flesh inhabited by our souls that provides the vehicle for us to even wreak havoc through this gift of goodwill. Anyway, the point is that I believe that our manifestation itself is a gift of God. And I believe that the limitations of our awareness are such that as physical organisms in a physical world, our memories, which is to say the interiority of our soul, in part, is shaped by our experience of this place. So we have dreams, we have ideas about the afterlife, we have visions, some of us anyway, and the way in which we experience them is typically within a set of spatial constraints, right? So the afterlife takes place in another world. It is a paradise, a walled garden, right? We return somehow to the walled garden that we were originally cast out from. But the important thing is that everything's spatial. So we have two eyes, which give us depth perception. Without two eyes, we can imagine that we have depth perception, but in fact, we do not. With two ears, we can triangulate the position of a sound that happens around us. So in this way, we have the physical equipment that gives us a sense of space. And how shall I fit this in here? The nature of our organism is such that it's like a set of training wheels that help us to make space within us. You can imagine like the old way you used to have a phonograph machine. The singer would literally like kind of sing into this horn, and it would go down and vibrate, and it would cut a groove in a record. And to reproduce the sound, you would simply place a similar horn and needle into the thing, and it would come back out again. So after a fashion, I feel as though the physical equipment we have is most important, perhaps, in the sense that it allows us to craft an analog of space and an understanding of spatial relationships, which carry them with them the distance of that which is near and that which is far, that which is me and that which is not me, the point that can move within space and have different perspectives, like degrees of arc of a circle around a central point, which means different perspectives and viewpoints, the difference between point consciousness and field consciousness. So I believe that, and indeed there is the tradition that within ourselves, through what was called the arts of memory, we could craft our own memories, but that they would be organized spatially. And I can't get into it because of the time constraints, but the idea was that we built a memory within ourselves and we would have reference to it. And because that memory was ours, rather than being something that was outside of us in a book, then it was truly a part of our prudence and could be a foundation for our ethics and everything else. But it was spatial. You would have spatial arrangements to organize the information that you placed within your memory. And it could even be argued that the natural memory, as opposed to the artificial memory, itself created spaces, which is why we experience different landscapes in our dreams and meet different characters. All of this, you might be wondering, well, what the hell does this have to do about our consciousness ceasing after we die? Well, my belief is that our consciousness, such as we understand it now, from the limited perspective we have, gifted with this form by God's grace, which we only have for a time, ultimately, this body will die. And the consciousness and the memories that are associated with it, the entire memory, all of the experiences, they're based on space. And yet, how do we make that space within us? Well, my belief is that through consciousness, through willing and conscious participation in the grace of manifestation, we can impress upon our own memory a kind of space that is the link in the chain of development that we experience as men, as the anthropos, for which the most famous historical figure is Christ himself, and that we can make a garden within us. The kingdom of God is within you, and that if we create or recognize the existence and our participation in the creation of, to the limited extent that we create anything, we are not the creator, but perhaps we can reflect in the mirror of our soul the space that surrounds us, and through some inexplicable aspect of God's grace, we can bring that garden to life with its spatial characteristics. And then at that point, there would be a place for us to be, to remember, rather than being dipped, as the pagans used to say, in the river of Lethe and then return to this place with no memory of what had come before. So you have, I think there's a line in the Bible where Christ says, "I am Elias, come again." And of course, there's considerable historical evidence for a belief in reincarnation among the Jews. And of course, Christ came from that cultural milieu. So I believe that usually our consciousness ceases after we die, because this little germ, this little spark of awareness that exists within us in potential, we generally are outwardly focused, and we don't recognize that the kingdom of God is within us, and we do not create this spatial analog which lends order to our experiences and our memories in a place in such a way that that we would have a place to stand after the dissolution of our body. But even that only begins to cover the kind of trials that could be involved. I do not have the time to get into it, but the way I looked at it was, I came across some stuff in Tibetan lore about how training in dream yoga was supposed to be training for maintaining your consciousness across incarnations. And so the first way that they would start you, like training wheels, was to remain conscious even though you go to sleep. From the moment you actually go to sleep, it doesn't mean stay awake all night. It means go to sleep, but remain conscious, with the massive qualitative differences in the experiences one undergoes. Well, that's difficult. Imagine how difficult it is to go to sleep, but remain conscious, and then wake up the next morning. Well, in the case of waking up the next morning, there's no real difficulty with continuity, because you've been asleep for 8 hours or 6 hours or whatever it's been. There's been a lapse of time while you were gone, so to speak. But you come back in 6 hours later into the same cultural milieu, into the same environment, the same body. There's continuity. If you were to attempt to continue your consciousness through death and to the other side, as it were, I recognize that this is not a strictly Christian metaphysic. You would have to come into the body of a child that has not yet developed all the neural pathways. That is basically just this snot-covered sucking thing looking for the smell of a woman's armpit, from which it could then navigate to the nipple itself. You wouldn't even have depth perception at that point. So you would be coming into another physical organism that would suggest an even stronger disjunction than you would experience in the hypothetical training wheel exercise of staying conscious through a period of sleep. The main parallel here is sleep and death. In that sleep of death, what dreams become, the metaphorical relationship between wakefulness and sleep and life and death. I've looked into this quite a bit further. I've gone past the scope of what you wanted to ask about with this idea, because there was nothing about reincarnation in here. But I wanted to suggest that there would be serious qualitative differences in maintaining consciousness, because everything that we know is based on space, which is based on God's creation. And so we would withdraw into ourselves, and we are not God. We can only create, and so we put quotes around that, insofar as we somehow reflect what actually is. I think of our souls as being like a mirror, as indeed many mystics have described it. The mirror does show you everything that it reflects, but is it real? Is it real in the same way God's creation is? No, of course not. But perhaps there is some mystical way in which, with the acceptance of God's grace, that reflection in the glass, as in a glass darkly, could come to life, and perhaps one could return to the garden and see that the kingdom of God is within you, but only if you properly reflect what is there. And so, if you haven't built that place within, if there is no kingdom of heaven within you, then, well, yes, you do not enjoy eternal life.
Mm. You have a beautiful way of weaving together so many kind of disparate insights, wisdom from various places. I was wondering if you were to describe your sort of your position with regards to religion. Do you see yourself in a Christian tradition in particular, or an esoteric tradition, or are you charting your own course? Where would you self-describe if you were to, in a word or a sentence, pin yourself on the great board of worldviews and philosophies out there? Or are you really just at the buffet cart, as it were, like finding the best that everybody has to offer and seeking to maximize wisdom across all traditions?
Well, yes, there's some of that, but I would say that I am a Catholic in the sense of being a universalist, as regards the fact that any given sensory set of experiences, which of course extends outward from what you see and smell to what you read in a book that other men thought, that all of it is pregnant with wisdom in potential. So a Catholic in the sense of a universal outlook, in the sense that anything could teach me because I'm in God's creation, but a perennialist, and certainly inclining towards the mystical, not in the sense that I make any claims for myself, but the thinkers and religious men of the past, and perhaps I'll meet some of the present, that interest me most are ones who are most driven to some direct experience of the divine. And that unfortunately has been wrapped up with Gnosticism now, and in our right-wing circles, that's a dirty word. But I believe that one is supposed to attempt to know.
There's a few people around in our circles who would describe themselves as Gnostics. I guess it's as with most of these religious terms, they're what is it they say? Whenever an Englishman opens his mouth, then another Englishman hates him. There's an aspect of tribalism that always seeps in.
Yes. But just for the record, I am not going to I'm not here asserting that I am a Gnostic. And sorry, my snout is troubling me. Yes, pardon me, ladies and gentlemen. Only here on this channel can you see someone wipe his nose.
This is the casual channel where we feel at home with our guests, and that's the whole joy of it. Well, I'm gonna give you a 10, which I hope doesn't offend your geodecimal sensitivities.
It does. That's for it not being a properly Christian framework.
Well, think of it as not a 1-0, but as a like an A. You know, if it was if this was not a base 10 numbering system that we were having to work with, then
I think it's better than being forced to ride the witch's ducking stool or being burned alive. So I'll take a 10.
Of course, it's interesting that 12 is a number in Christian numerology that's quite high in its nature, as you mentioned, the number of apostles, the number of tribes, etc. Whereas the number 6 is one less than 7 imperfect, etc. And yet 12 is double 6. So that's always intrigued me that 14 didn't make it as a key number. But that's why I'm not inventing the number systems, because I've got
not as rich in factors.
There you go.
You see, with the ancient numbering systems, you got base 20 for the Mayans. They're counting on their fingers and toes. You have for the Romans, you have base 5, which gets misunderstood as base 10, but it's 5, which is why 5, the symbol looks like a V. Yes. But the then you have base 12. You have the Babylonian sexagesimal, which is base 60, which is just fat with factors. After 12, base 60 is, of course, right, and hence 360. Yes,
of course.
And German long hundreds among the ancient Germans, they had 10 times 12 for units of men. 120.
And
120 was
12 times 12 figures a few times in the Bible. 144.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Should we dig into the next round? Do you fancy cinema and theatre, world affairs, or epistemology?
Oh, well, I've gone with music and metaphysics. Epistemology, I've probably blown some of my exciting background material, because everything I just talked about also has to do with theories of knowledge.
That's true.
So let's come down into the filth and do world affairs.
This shows your breadth. The topics that you're choosing, you're taking the maximally, you're discussing I've had guests who've tried to chain all their answers together, and you're doing the opposite, to see the widest view of the world, which I enjoy a lot.
Well, I was trained when I was young to despise specialists. And I was told specifically that if I was some kind of bug that could only eat the moss that grew on a particular side of a tree during a certain time of year, that I would be destroyed, that man should be a generalist. So,
well, let us continue our polymathematical discussion.
Yes.
Mainstream media is the tool of the hands of the elite. A global elite shapes world affairs, or populism is a delusion.
Let us go with a global elite shapes world affairs, and I will argue in favor of this.
Great. Take it away.
Well, there is quite a bit of talk about conspiracy theories. The idea that conspiracy theories are ridiculous. And there is a strong tendency on the part of those who hold this view that they're ridiculous, that the tinfoil hat wearers and the Q-tards and the like don't understand. They're not sophisticated enough that to understand that there are things that are emergent, that basically systems become so complex that they begin to have follow-on orders of effect and to exhibit characteristics that might not be apparent in the individual elements of the system considered separately, and indeed might not be apparent immediately in terms of the system to whatever extent we can grasp it, taken as a whole. And so they tend to poo-poo this idea of conspiracy theories and the idea that some shadowy cabal could be doing something. Well, straight out of the gate, against that, I would use the expression of my old friend Tim Rudisill, who said, only the poor conspire, the rich simply make plans. It's quite easy to look into the etymology of conspire, which is to breathe or whisper together quietly. And it does seem that decisions get made by a small group of people who then make shit happen. We've got the idea with elite theory, which of course, academic agent has distilled from thinkers like Mosca, Pareto, and others. And the idea there is that an organized minority makes things happen simply because the of the requirements of getting human beings to integrate their behavior, to work in concert. And so we can see that across the world and across history and across human institutions, we see, if you've got Roman tribes, well, you've got tribunes, and people who speak for them. We've got the idea of representation. If you want to go to more primitive or absolute or hierarchical systems, you can look at the idea that you have a commander in chief, or you have, the tyrant of Syracuse, or you have Solon in Athens, carving his laws on rotating wooden cylinders so they can be reviewed by the populace. But there is a single decision maker. And you can see how in times of crisis among human beings, they recognize that a democracy is almost useless in terms of swiftly and effectively responding to crisis situations. And so, you have the idea that a president can declare martial law and assume war powers, and thereby cut out all sorts of representation for the period that the crisis is happening. You have it also, for example, with the Romans, who would select a dictator who would enjoy the prerogatives of that office, during the time of the crisis, because it's recognized that in order to make shit happen, you cannot have too many moving parts. Now, against this, you get all kinds of people who, want to replace the word government with the word governance. And I recently learned, someone kindly helped me with that on Twitter when I was bitching about it. That comes out of British political theory. And to me, it seems like a way that they described the state of affairs that we all enjoy at present, which is that government is no longer important. Government accountability, election by the citizenry, any relationship between what the people want and what actually gets done has been removed. And so the Brits came up with the idea of governance, where you've got non-governmental organizations and social structures and institutions like churches and mosques and labor unions and all the rest, and that they cannot be encompassed under the umbrella of government. So we have to talk about governance, which is very, very convenient for them, I think, because it's an acknowledgement of the circumstances that, yes, always do affect us to a certain degree, but needn't affect us to this degree. It's been encouraged. The idea of faceless people making decisions behind the scenes it's how it works now. Most particularly because if you know what the head of the snake is, you can cut it off. I mean, even if it's a hydra, you can go after whatever, it's 7 heads. I can't remember how many heads the hydra had, but the point is, if you don't know who's doing it, then you cannot remove them.
I feel like it started as 3, and then every time you cut one off, you get an extra 1.
Yes, that sounds right. So I guess that metaphor is perhaps not the best one for me to bring up in my yes. Yes. But you can identify the body from which the head sprouts, or the heads sprout, and you have other possible approaches to solving the problem. But if it's invisible, if you're fighting shadows and ghosts, or traipsing off to fight someone else over here that really has nothing to do with it, then the people who are in control are in a position to enjoy impunity as they operate. And indeed, we see increasingly that people are put up as fronts. I mean, who actually imagines that Rishi Sunak is a power player? Who imagines that he's anything other than a bag man or a step and fetch it boy? Who
I mean,
imagines
you
that
you could talk with Biden at the supposed head of your country.
indeed, or there are other cases where it does seem likely that Putin is in charge of things, or is
Yeah.
the front man for a very small group of people who make the decisions.
It did once occur to me that if you wanted to put two figureheads forwards to unmask the system, probably Sunak and Biden would be top choices as a kind of an actual anti-deep state move, like a very deep cover. Let's make it clear to everybody what the true nature of power is. Let's have somebody who's neither elected by the populace nor the party in one country, and then in the other country somebody who can could not organize a deck of cards, let alone run the country.
Yes, I think that there's quite a bit to that, and I'll come in with I mean, who imagines that he wasn't installed, Biden or Sunak, and who imagines that he cannot be removed immediately if someone wishes to? It's preposterous.
But if you were
The entire
choosing
thing is a
somebody to
joke.
install, why would you install somebody so obviously incompetent? Wouldn't you want somebody with an air of plausibility? So then it almost feels like a brag or a showboat, and that's where my idea is a communication, like a
humiliation.
Well, yes, I've heard that as well.
But
Either
see,
way,
you were very cleverly trying to take me down a tangential road in order to reduce my score. I aim to win this. So I'm going to give my final brief argument for why we must accept and take to heart the idea that a global elite shapes world affairs. Because if we do not recognize that, and if we go down the neo-reactionary slobberers route of affirming that it's emergent, it's these qualities of the system and it just happens, then we will raise people who imagine that they cannot shape affairs themselves and that others do not shape affairs themselves. If we imagine that there couldn't be anyone in charge, then not only do we allow the people who enjoy substituting conspiracy theory for the much more accurate term, which is allegation. They can dismiss allegations by calling them conspiracy theories. I prefer to just say, no, they're fucking allegations. And people should be required to answer them, in many cases in a court of law. But more importantly, we will not be raising the next generation of people. They'll be going to look at the systems. They'll try to understand the systems. Do not disrupt my circles. Or you're standing in my light. We will be stealing from ourselves the ability to create people who not only know but expect that they themselves can seize affairs by the throat and determine the destiny of their own people or nations. Sorry.
Is there a distinction between a national elite shapes the affairs nations, or say a civilizational elite shapes the affairs of the civilization? In the case of a global elite shapes world affairs, then are we also including the interplay between major powers? Is China a part of the same system, or does the current splintering from a unipolar to a multipolar world mean that there's actually not a global elite, but just a hegemony, a multinational but not universal power center?
I think we're just simply between the paving stones that we're walking across historically. And we aim to unite all under heaven, but there's still too many competing. I mean, think about, what was it, Alfred the Great, I guess, who created England and united, like Mercia and these other places. Before that happened, there was no England, and before, the Great Britain or the United Kingdom, there was not that thing. You had to be crowned king of England and Scotland and have the damn stone of scones under your throne or whatever. So I believe that in a similar fashion, we are taking a step towards uniting all under heaven, but we are not there yet. I think it's very clear that the most powerful people at this time show little interest in nation states. And so I'm certain that there is that there are global elites in competition who have already moved beyond the level of nation states. It's manifest in the case of like United Nations or the European Union or North American Free Trade Agreement or the climate accords. They're just increasing and continuing and increasing attempts to shape everything so that there's one organization, but we have not arrived there yet. And so I believe that there are competing global elites.
Well, let me show you your score for the round. You have exceeded the hated 10, but landed on a prime. So I don't know how you feel about that. Your score is 11 for round 3. And on to round 4. Psychology, elite theory, theology.
Psychology or theology? They overlap. Well, fuck it, I'm going in theology.
All right, here are 3 options. God's existence cannot be proven. God is immutable. Or faith is incompatible with scientific conclusions.
I'm going to go with God's existence cannot be proven, and I'm going to argue against it.
All right. I'm excited to hear this. Go away. Go ahead.
God's existence cannot be demonstrated. God's existence cannot be demonstrated. Now, that's a bit of acuteness, because it could be argued that to actually prove something, you should be able to demonstrate. However, I think it matters here, because the question is whether or not it can be established in such a fashion that there can be no doubt among all men based on the demonstration of the evidence, which would then amount to proof. However,
do you remember that moment in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy where the Babelfish is a creature that, by pure chance, happens to function as a perfect translator if you put it in your ear? And since there's no possible way for this to have evolved by chance, it proves God's existence. But because proof denies faith, therefore God cannot exist. And he disappears in a puff of logic. A beautiful bit of Douglas Adams silliness.
Logic. Well, he named my generational cohort, as it were, but I still I still kind of dislike him.
Not a fan.
Yeah.
He does.
So
have that,
I believe,
yes, slightly self-satisfied faux intellectualism about him.
Yeah, well, as many such cases, and I'm hardly in a position to be able to poo-poo that too much, given my own
No, neither.
high ideas about myself. God's existence cannot be proven. I think that's, you can only say it conditionally if you specify that it's demonstrated conclusively to all men. in the same fashion that certain axiomatic scientific understandings have been demonstrated. But even within that epistemological framework, there's the understanding that they will be more or less accurate theories subject to revision. You can also talk about how, for example, if you attempt to impose actual tempered tuning or true tuning, you're going to introduce distortions. The circle of fifths isn't really a circle; it's a spiral. If you come up with tempered tuning and you're taking a look at your keyboard, yeah, they can get it to pretty much work in terms of the frequencies. When you hit C and C and C across each octave, but there are going to be distortions that are introduced into the system in order to rationalize it. And so God is not rational. God is infinite and beyond all our understanding. That's why the Renaissance mystics would talk about the mors osculum. If I'm not butchering that Latin, I probably am. It's probably osculi or something. But anyway, the idea is that it's a kiss of death. It's a kiss of annihilation. The spirit is carried up, and the individual self is annihilated in the fullness of that experience of the divine. It exceeds the rational so thoroughly that I would imagine any mystic would tell you never confuse the measurable for the real. And I would come from the other direction and say that faith itself shows more power than scientific understanding in the domain of human affairs and actions. I've yet to see a scientist willing to be eaten by lions in the arena. I don't hear about I hear much is made of how scientists were martyred because they were rejected by a particular group of people, but they do not advance with an untroubled brow towards their fate in the way that faith can carry a man. So I would look at the behavior of the saints and holy men as proof of the divine, because it allows them to do things that are arguably superhuman. And at the same time, within ourselves individually, it is possible to develop faith, which is not only more important, that in addition to going beyond the rational, it's more important to us individually. When we're on our deathbeds, I can assure you that that those of us capable of introspection, who are not just running away into the outward in order to avoid turning inward, as of necessity we all must do at that time, we're not going to be wondering about some sort of scientific theory. Unless it has to do with the existence of God in the afterlife and our fortunes that yawn before us. So I would say that God's existence cannot be demonstrated in a rational way because it exceeds all of those categories. I mean, the whole idea of negative theology is that you cannot talk about God except, or apophatic theology is that you cannot talk about God except insofar as you describe what it is not. Even the recitation in Islam of the divine names carries with it a sense that you repeat all these qualities and characteristics, and they culminate in the sound of a breath, which is Allah, which is why you'll hear like Sufis saying "Hu," in Turkish they'll say "Hu diyelim," because the exhalation of the breath is thought to be in some sense the most truly divine utterance.
I've heard similar things about Yah and Yahweh, that they were kind of non. I don't know the technical term, but in linguistics, when the consonants don't close,
I cannot recall them either.
These vowels are sort of half vowel, half consonant sounds. Well, I think, since you've given me such a compelling and I think a take on this that I haven't heard before. I'm happy to just give you your 11 points, and we can.
Did I beat D? Did I beat D?
Well, we haven't reached the end of the game show yet, but there is a high score table waiting for us.
All
So
right.
there's only
Excellent.
one
Like
way
at
to
the
find
end
out.
of Galaga or Pac-Man.
We actually have 2 rounds left to go, but we've gone a
good
little
God.
slow, so we need to we need to
I'll
pick
speed
up
it
the
up.
pace.
Oh.
Technology, natural sciences, or Christology?
I'm trying to move quickly, but I must win.
Well, I promise I will not penalise you for short answers. If I remember,
Okay.
D had to do his last round in 2 minutes, so
Okay. All right. I at least have to beat him, dirtbag. Okay. Christology. It's the one I'm least qualified for. But...
Okay, I'll try and take that into account in scoring. Jesus is fully man and fully God. Jesus' message was about social justice, poverty, and inequality. Jesus' life shows us how to suffer.
I am going to... Oh, why did I do this? Oh.
You like to challenge yourself.
Okay, but I won't be penalized by...
I'll be
answers?
considerate that you. I'll give you extra leniency, given that you've taken such a broad range of topics over the course of. I appreciate that range, so I'll give you points for that.
So, well, I mean, Jesus is fully God and fully man. Yes, I will argue for that. I'm going to get a 1.
It's unlikely that you'll get a 1. You get a 1 for turning up, I think.
Because the Bible tells me so.
Hmm.
And this entire wall over here, can you see these ones right about
Shall I see if I can maximize you on the screen? There might be
no, they'll see something strange in my environment that will get me in trouble. That's all the Greek and Latin fathers, because all of those books and traditions tell me that it is so, and I am not one to dispense with the accumulated wisdom of a couple of millennia.
What about the contrary wisdom from other traditions? Like, I mean, in Islam, they are.
All right, he's second to Muhammad in terms of being holiness, and he's considered a prophet, just not the last one.
But not in any way, as I understand it, to be equated with, in identity with Allah.
Oh, I've just... I'm going to lose. I'm just going to lose. I believe that Jesus fulfilled the human potential that is the gift of God and recognized his potential. However, I am deeply heretical insofar as I believe when he said, leave it all behind and follow me. I believe that he didn't mean worship my figure on a cross. He meant do as I have done. And so I believe that Christ is one of the deepest and most important symbols for man, insofar as he realized the divine within himself. But my heresy extends so far that I believe that it exists in potential within all of us to do and be as Christ has done and been. However, it's I'm not saying the odds are good for me, nor for anyone else. And so to answer your question about Islam and the rest, none of those other traditions, well, not I shouldn't say none, but Islam certainly does not carry that affirmation of the manifest man as having in potential within himself. And I hasten to add, by God's grace, my heresy does not extend to the rejection of the idea that it is through God's grace and God's grace alone that such things happen. But Islam does not hold that position. I mean, unless you get into esoteric Shiite stuff, and it would be reserved for members of the Prophet's family, in the sense of some mystical imam.
Well, I guess in terms of scoring for the round, you haven't expressed a sort of orthodox Christian position, but that's not what I'm that's not what I'm scoring you on. I'm scoring you on specifically this statement, and in a slightly different way to the way that I would support it. I think you're saying that we all could enter the divine, and that Jesus merely pioneered that. So he was fully God in a way that is non-unique. Am I understanding what you're saying correctly?
But see, if any human being realizes God through grace within him or herself, then it has to be unique. But it's a unique participation in that which is itself most truly unique, because there is nothing else to make anything out of other than God. And
well, I think I'm going to give you a 9, and that's still a generous score. Believe me, I think you're still on track, depending on how round 6 goes, to beat D. And I like to keep things tense. So if you're happy to take a look at the final
score shekels,
your final options: literature, software and mathematics, or eschatology.
Well, it's sure as fuck not going to be software and mathematics.
That is my specialist subject, so you'd be really up against.
Yeah, I'd be. Eschatology, I'm going to assume that it's going to be primarily Christian, so I barely skated out of my last foray. So for the first one, I don't have anything good up my sleeve for. So let's see, literature.
Okay, here are your options. Children's literature is as complex and significant as adult literature. Poetry is the most potent form of literature. Or fictional narratives have great power.
Oh God, it's going to be such a anticlimax. I'm going to argue for the idea that fictional narratives have great power.
All right, go for it.
Well, I mean, the basic idea is that there are only a certain number of stories. That's been asserted many times. There have, in fact, been people who have attempted to put together books. Like there was an Italian guy who came up with the 36 fundamental plots. Interesting, 3 times 12, 36, same as the number of the decans. Or you have the idea that, there was an old saying once upon a time, I can't tell you who said it, but it was the idea that a man who knew Shakespeare could not be tricked. He would be prepared for anything that came at him, because somehow in the across the range of works of the Bard, there was there was enough about human experience and circumstances that was covered that almost sort of in microcosm, you have the various ways and rules and relationships that human beings could be in with each other. So we have this basic idea that there are only a certain fundamental number of stories. and I have seen through the course of my own life that certain fundamental stories were impressed upon me by my circumstances. So it's certainly, it makes perfect sense to dismiss the over reliance upon the idea that our childhood shaped us. You know, everybody's had experiences with a father who was present that they loved, or who was absent that they loved, or absent that they hated, or present and they hated him, or, you know, they loved him and he died, or a mother who had issues, or, you know, sibling rivalry, or these patterns. Though again, I do acknowledge that they're the superficial understandings of them are too often uncritically applied. There is nevertheless a certain way in which our family shapes us. And you can almost imagine, you know, that there are just a certain number of ways that human beings can interact based on the roles and relationships that we have available to us. You know, one of the fundamental ways that stories get told is a love story, and that will properly be between a man and a woman, leaving aside our sort of repulsive innovations of late. And so we can see in just this one relationship between a man and a woman how an entire group of stories appears. If we take a look at the idea of a man attempting to seize power, you know, you could look at a story like Macbeth, you know, or if you want to talk about prowess and heroism, you could look at the Iliad. If you want to talk about an old man who has risen to the heights of power, but then has it all crumble around him, you could talk about King Lear. And we can see, however, that there are basic human relationships. You know, I guess I shouldn't have just called the non-heterosexual relationships of current vintage, because I just mentioned the Iliad, and of course there's Patroclus and Achilles. But we've got love relationships, we've got competition, we've got vying for power, we've got revenge, ambition, all of these things. Well, these are available to us as a certain fundamental set. You could essentially think of it as combinatorics, right? So one of the famous ways that we talk about the Roman Caesars, and it came up through history, you know, is they talk about the 12, you know, because of these most important sort of 12 historical figures. In their own way, the apostles, at least to a certain extent, can embody certain qualities, right? So, you know, Thomas and doubt, right? We have the idea of a certain number of divine figures within any pantheon, and we see time and again that certain roles are set aside for them. You know, so you've got Shango in West Africa as god of iron and war. You've got Ares or Mars, right? You've got Apollo and Rudra in India, right? Apollo and Rudra both send down arrows with disease. You know, must be a coincidence. So we have a certain number of archetypes. And you can take that from the sort of Jungian perspective of these elements of the psyche that sort of, it's not clear whether they exist in some pure sense, Platonic sense, prior sense, or if they're filled up by experience in some Aristotelian sense. Nevertheless, we do have these patterns, and these patterns come to us in ways that have meaning, which is to say the way we understand the combinatorics of life, social relationships and personal relationships, is through archetypes that carry with them a certain fundamental freight of meaning. And I have to make this fast. I've already gone on too long. The basic idea is that without them, we lose the meaning. There's a certain meaning that we bring to a story based on the reflection of the archetypes that are in the story within ourselves. So, for example, I go and watch some of these Chinese movies, Chinese adventure movies or whatever, and half the time, even if it's a good translation, I have no idea what the fuck is going on. Because the archetypes of their interaction at the cultural level don't have meaning for me. I'm like, well, why did this guy who was just kicked out, not take revenge, or whatever? I can't remember a particular instance, but outside of my proper cultural milieu, yes, there will be love between a man and a woman, which is fundamentally human, and at that level it's more fundamental. I can get that. But as you rise in layers of cultural overlay, there are things with which I'm familiar and things with which I'm not. And so it means that I verge from, or I stray from the realm of meaning into the realm of meaninglessness. And so meaning itself hinges upon these archetypes, these fundamental elements that are carried forth in myth and story and in various types of narrative. And if anyone doubts that they have great power, I would say that we impose them even in situations where they only half fit. Many people want to think of someone like Donald Trump as being a divine king, when really he's just kind of he's a New York businessman with gold toilets. And yet the proof of the power is that we still somehow wish to see him in this way, even when it doesn't fit. Is like Procrustes, the myth. You have the idea of the Procrustes, the innkeeper, and he was famous because he had a bed to fit everyone, no matter how tall you were, how short. Well, it would fit the bed. Your body would fit the bed because he would rack you out if you were too short, or lop your limbs off to make you fit if you were too long. And so, human understanding, our search for meaning itself, is Procrustean. We try to get the guest to fit the bed, but it's a testament to the power of fictional narratives that we do that we impose that.
Well, you know what? I'm going to give you 12 for that answer. Started and finished extremely strong, and now is time for the high score table. But this doesn't have you on it yet. This is the score table prior to your run at the Gauntlet. As you can see, John D was at the top. So let's find out how you've done. We have a new victor. Semiogogue, 4 points ahead of D.
Crushed D. I crushed him.
Crushed not only D, but everybody else who's come before him. And so, congratulations.
That's what I'm talking about.
You are truly the master of the Gauntlet. But thank you for joining me.